Good day. Over the last few hours, the Russian Ministry of Defense has provided us with some information about what the Russians say is the progress they've been making on the front lines. This isn't something the Russian Ministry of Defense does very often, but when it does, it's usually an indication that there's been significant progress and that events are moving towards some sort of conclusion. So I'm going to just briefly read what the Russian Ministry of Defense is reporting. And it says the following: as a result of an offensive in Kherson-Nikolayev direction near Alexandrovka, the Allied forces have eliminated units of the 28th Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces and have reached the administrative border of Nikolayev region. 36 square kilometers of Kherson region have been liberated. Well, that's the Russian Ministry of Defense. They say liberated. Ukrainians would no doubt say that they've been occupied. But anyway, I'm sticking for the moment, for the purpose of this video, to what the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying. Now, they're continuing to discuss developments on the front lines in Kherson-Nikolayev region, and they go on to say Komsomolskoye has been liberated, advancing 3 kilometers into the enemy defense in this direction. Territory of 12 square kilometers of Nikolayev region has been liberated. Now, I don't fully know where Komsomolskoye is, but I have seen some reports in Russian supportive media that the Russians are now within sight, visible sight, of Nikolayev city. Whether this is true or not, of course, I can't discuss. And then rounding off on developments on this part of the front line between Kherson and Nikolayev, the Russian Ministry of Defense then goes on to say that the 35th Marine Brigade and 46th Aeromobile Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces suffered losses near Andriivka. The enemy is dislodged from Blagodatovka and neighboring populated areas. And in fact, as I discussed in a video a few days ago, it was in fact the Ukrainian General Staff that first disclosed to us the fact that Ukraine had lost control of this town of Blagodatovka, and that the situation for Ukraine that had become critical around Nikolayev in ways that were unexpected, because very typically the Russians provide, as I said, very few reports on the actual progress of the actual fighting. When I say the Russians, I want to stress again, it's the Russian Ministry of Defense. Now, in the same communique, the Russians have also provided us with more information about what's going on in Donbass. And the Russian Ministry of Defense says that the liberation of Marinka is more than 75% complete and is nearing completion. Now, Marinka is one of these other very heavily fortified villages, or perhaps suburb areas close to Donetsk city, and it was very much a part of the Ukrainian defense lines in this area, and it's, as I understand it on the map, it's south of Pesky, this other heavily fortified village, which the Russians captured about 2 weeks ago. And the Russians have been pushing south, or rather the Allied forces, if you like, have been pushing south. Most of the fighting here, most of the infantry consists of soldiers of the Donetsk militia, though the Russians do provide artillery support, and also they also provide support in other ways, drones and other things, but also some of the tank units that engage in this fighting in this part of the line are definitely Russian. And of course, these terrifying TOS-1 flamethrower tanks and these Terminator tanks with their heavy machine guns and their anti-tank missiles. They're actually operated by the Russian military itself. So this is what the Russians have been describing. Marinka, this other heavily fortified village south of Pesky, is about to fall, widening this gap in the Ukrainian lines opposite Donetsk city. And then we go on to read that the encirclement of the Ukrainian force, the Ukrainian military force near Avdiivka continues. Now, Avdiivka is a bigger place than Pesky or Marinka. It's a bigger suburb, if you like, or a small town, if you prefer. It's also where, as I said, a lot of the Ukrainian artillery, which has been shelling Donetsk, is located. And the Russians here are confirming that they are working towards encircling Avdiivka. So this is obviously the battle plan in this area. And then they tell us a little more. The 214th Op 4 Battalion, an elite unit of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, is blockaded on 3 sides near Kodema and is being routinely destroyed. Now, Kodema is one of these very important places which are between this area in opposite Donetsk and the key Ukrainian positions in Bakhmut, a bit further north, and there's been a major battle underway to capture Kodema. The Russians are working hard to capture Kodema. Again, I should stress when I say the Russians, it seems that most of the fighting is being done by Donetsk militia, supported by the Wagner mercenary group, and also no doubt by some Chechen fighters as well. So the Russians claim that this battalion, this elite battalion of the Ukrainian armed forces, is being routinely destroyed, as they put it. And then the Russian Ministry of Defense continues to say in Artemovsk area. Artemovsk, of course, is Bakhmut. The Russians continue to use the old Soviet name for this town. They call it Artemovsk. The Ukrainians call it Bakhmut. In the Artemovsk area, as a result of the successful Allied forces offensive, the troops have advanced very close to Zaitsevo, which is an important defense node of the city. Now, can I just say something here? Because this is a good example of why one has to be very careful about some of the reports one is getting from sources which are not official, because there have been various Russian sites that have been claiming for some time that the Russians have actually captured, or that the militia has actually captured Zaitsevo. Now, the Russian Ministry of Defense in this bulletin has rather cast doubt on that. It seems that the Allied forces are very close to Zaitsevo. They're probably going to capture it very soon, but they haven't captured it yet. Now, we've been getting more reports from other sources. The reporter of Bild Zeitung, who's one of the few reporters in this, who's in the West, a German reporter who keeps careful track of what's happening on the battlefields. He's admitted that the fighting in Soledar, this northern suburb of Bakhmut, that this has now moved into the central area, that the Ukrainians have essentially been pushed out of the industrial area of Soledar and have lost much of the eastern part of this town. The Ukrainians have entrenched themselves in some high-rise buildings in Soledar, and there's been various artillery actions by the Russians in order to soften up this defense line before they break through. This reporter from BITCHUTE, he talks about the Ukrainians having succeeded in creating this defense line in the middle of Soledar. Well, that's one way of describing it. In fact, it's clear that the Ukrainians have been pushed back from the eastern part of Soledar, that they're still holding out, as I said, in this central area. And clearly a major fight is underway. Now, let me again reiterate a point which I've made on previous occasions. The major target of the Russians in this part of the front around Bakhmut is Bakhmut itself. At some point, once all of these towns and settlements south, east and north of Bakhmut, places like Kodema and Soledar and Bakhmutsky, have been fully cleared, then the Russians will move towards attacking Bakhmut itself. We're obviously still some way off from this, but once that happens, then there will be this major Russian advance into Bakhmut itself. And gradually, incrementally, steadily, that day is getting closer. And I think this Russian bulletin is intended to highlight the fact that has been the pattern of Russian bulletins up to now. They are published when they report advances which the Russians are certain have been consolidated, that there's no prospect of counterattacks or counteroffensives of Ukraine being able to throw the Russians back from any particular location as a result of whatever counterattacks the Ukrainians are able to organize. And by the way, that German reporter from BITCHUTE, he's actually conceded, for example, that though the Ukrainians are still holding out in central Soledar, they are not able to drive the Russians out of the eastern areas of Soledar itself. So we can see how the net on Bakhmut, around Bakhmut, is slowly closing. It's very similar to the pattern that we saw in the fighting that led to the eventual collapse of the Severodonetsk conurbation in Lugansk region. It took a while. It was very incremental. It required heavy siege work and work by sappers to demine areas and things of that kind. But eventually, the collapse came in Lugansk region. It came suddenly, and the same pattern is repeating itself. And I'm going to say again that Bakhmut, it seems to me, is clearly the linchpin of this whole operation. Once Bakhmut falls, it will be like the fall of Popoznaya in Lugansk. Once Popoznaya, an important fortified town in Lugansk region, or at least in the northern Donbass region, fell, we saw that progressively every other Ukrainian defense line in northern Donbass also fell, and eventually this led to the total collapse of Ukrainian resistance in Lugansk region, so that the fighting then shifted east and south into Donetsk region as well. So this is, it seems to me, what we're starting to see happen in Donetsk region. Now, it's tough, it's incremental. The head of the Donetsk People's Republic, a man called Denis Pushilin, has said that it's like drilling through concrete, but it's been done. It's been done steadily, perhaps more slowly than some people on the Russian side would like, but clearly all the indications are that that's where the Russians are moving. And as I said, the fact that the Russians don't seem to have taken control of this place, Zaitsevo, as some have reported, is a good indication that you should be extremely careful before you accept uncritically information that comes even from reliable or seemingly reliable sources which has not been officially confirmed by the Russians themselves. So there we go. That's, it seems to me, the pattern of the fighting in Donbass. And of course, it's also the pattern of the fighting in Nikolayev and Kherson region. And it is increasingly starting to look as if the Russians do have Nikolayev in their sights. Nikolayev, incidentally, is a city with a pre-war population roughly the same size as Mariupol, though it is, of course, the capital of its region, Nikolayev region. And by the way, I'm going to continue to refer to it as Nikolayev. I've since been informed that it was named after St. Nicholas by its founder, Prince Grigory Potyomkin, the general and lover of Catherine the Great, who was the actual founder of this city, of Nikolayev, at the end of the 18th century. So Potyomkin called it Nikolayev after St. Nicholas, and I'm going to stick to calling it Nikolayev, which is its Russian name. Anyway, sooner or later, it looks as if the Russians are working towards capturing Nikolayev itself. Whether they are indeed close to Nikolayev city, whether they can indeed actually see it through their binoculars and all that, I'm not obviously able in any way to say, not being there myself, but all the indications are that eventually a push on Nikolayev will come. Now, all of this is actual events on the battlefields. We're hearing huge amount of talk and discussion about other things. The United States has told again, for the umpteenth time, all Americans to leave Ukraine. The Ukrainian government has been telling its officials, the people who work for the Ukrainian government, to stay at home because they expect some massive Russian strike over the next couple of days, perhaps corresponding with Ukraine's Independence Day. There's been other reports that some major Russian air offensive is being prepared. The US State Department has apparently or supposedly warned the Russians that they should not escalate the fighting in Ukraine. Extraordinary claim, by the way. And there's been fears that civilian infrastructure is about to be attacked by the Russians in some form. And the Military Summary Channel has published, I thought, rather wild theory that the Russian Parliament is preparing to give Putin some kind of carte blanche. And whilst the Military Summary Channel didn't tell us exactly what that carte blanche is supposed to be, it seemed to hint that it was something to do with nuclear weapons, despite the fact that the Russians have consistently and firmly denied that they have any plans to use nuclear weapons. Now, I'm going to say this: I don't think the Russians are planning any massive, overwhelming military strikes over the next couple of hours. I think that this is all scaremongering. I don't see any indications of this. I think the Russians are reasonably pleased with the progress of their military operation in Donbass. They are, it seems, confident that they're inflicting heavy losses on the Ukrainian forces. General Zaluzhny, the Ukrainian military commander, has said that Ukraine's total losses killed in action are around 9,000. Well, that's what General Zaluzhny says. Most people, myself included, of course, think it's multiples greater than that. And I suspect that Zaluzhny said this in order to calm nerves in Ukraine as the losses on the battlefields continue to mount and as the threat to Nikolayev increases. And of course, and last but not least, the great Ukrainian counteroffensive on Kherson region never came. Now, what we have seen over the last few hours are more HIMARS strikes, Ukrainian HIMARS strikes on the two bridges across the Dnieper River, the Antonovsky Bridge and the road and rail bridge across the dam. and the Russians say that in both cases the damage is repairable. There was apparently an explosion on an ammunition warehouse, a Russian ammunition warehouse near the dam. I suspect that this may have been the primary target. I've said that I strongly suspect that the Russians used the railway bridge across the dam to transport their heavy munitions, the heavy munitions that the Russian forces west of the Dnieper in this part of Ukraine need. And it would be logical if you have railway trains coming in, crossing the dam, for warehouses to be set up close to the dam, where some of this ammunition is also parked as the trains move backwards and forwards. I'm assuming, by the way, that there is some kind of railway station or siding in this area close to the dam. It would be logical to think that. And I'm actually starting to come to a slightly different conclusion about these attacks on the dam, on the dam and on the road bridge. Earlier, a couple of weeks ago, it was speculated that this was all some attempt to isolate the Russian forces west of the Dnieper River, preparatory to some great Ukrainian advance on Kherson region, and with the plan to encircle and destroy these Russian forces. One never hears anything like this anymore. I wonder whether the real purpose of attacking the dams was to slow the pace of the Russian build-up west of the Dnieper, which the Ukrainians realized, and perhaps their intelligence provided from the Americans and the British were alerting them to, whether all of this build-up west of the Dnieper was actually intended not to defend Kherson region, but to prepare for this Russian offensive on Nikolayev, and whether the attacks on the bridges are some kind of attempt to slow the build-up of munitions and supplies to the Russian forces west of the Dnieper in order to slow down this advance on Nikolayev. In that case, by the way, the Ukrainian attempts to establish a bridgehead across the Ingulets River have some resemblance to what the Ukrainians have been doing on the western flank of the big Russian Izium bridgehead in Donbass and Kharkiv region. The Ukrainians have been continuously trying to send troops to attack this bridgehead from the west, from its western side, basically clearly now, in order to slow the progress of Russian operations in Donbass. And I wonder whether these Ukrainian operations on the Ingulets River, not really intended as part of any offensive on Kherson region, but whether they weren't in fact really, their purpose wasn't really to try to slow the Russian advance on Nikolayev. I'm not a military strategist, as I always like to say, but one learns a lot from this kind of fighting, and it seems to me more logical that the Ukrainians might be thinking in this way than to suppose that they are really planning an offensive against Kherson, which clearly isn't going to materialize. And the attacks on the bridges, on the bridge over the dam and on the Antonovsky Bridge, well, they've done damage to both. The latest attack on the Antonovsky Bridge appears to have destroyed some of the equipment on the bridge that was being used to repair it, and it appears to have killed some of the construction workers. But in neither case has it put either bridge fully out of action, or at least it hasn't damaged the bridges to such an extent as to threaten their structural integrity. And I'm confident, as I said previously, that the railway bridge, at least, which is the most important of these bridges, if you're sending heavy equipment across the Dnieper, that's still operating apparently successfully. The British Ministry of Defence, by the way, now says that the Russians are building a pontoon bridge near the Antonovsky Bridge in order to keep their troops and the civilian population across the Dnieper supplied. And pontoon bridges are, well, they have various problems. Obviously, they are not permanent. They have to be replaced, so they're not a substitute in terms of civilian use for permanent, proper bridges. But they're modular. They're made up of barges. And of course, if one is attacked or destroyed by a HIMARS strike, it's easier, I suppose, to replace that barge and to keep the bridge operating. So, maybe that this is what that pontoon bridge is all about. There's some suggestions, by the way, that the pontoon bridge where it is being built, is going to be shielded also by the Antonovsky Bridge. That'd be more difficult for the missiles to hit it. Well, I'm not in a position to say whether or not that is true. Anyway, there we go. That seems to be the overall pattern of the fighting in southwest Ukraine. But there's no doubt also that there's more fighting going on in Kharkiv region, northwest Kharkiv region, but the Russians are being extremely tight-lipped about this, as are the Ukrainians. We don't really know very much about what is going on there. Now, let me repeat and conclude with this summary of the military situation. There's been a huge amount of discussion about whether the Russians are operating to any particular timetable. Perhaps they are, perhaps they're not. But one thing I'm absolutely certain about is that the Russians will be able to continue military operations through September without being significantly interrupted in any way. And of course, the autumn rains, when they do come, will no doubt cause some mud and some problems. But there is no reason at all why the Russian army can't operate in all of these places during the winter. There's some kind of idea which seems to have taken hold, which I don't completely understand, which assumes that the Russian army, of all armies, is not going to be able to maintain its offensive during the winter. Nobody's ever provided me with any explanation of why this is the case. I don't believe it, and I would point out that, of course, the Russian decision to intervene in Ukraine was made in February, which is presumably winter. So I just don't understand the logic of this argument at all, and I don't think that it has any mileage. Certainly in the Second World War, the Russians showed an impressive ability to continue military operations in winter, and I've no doubt that they can do the same this time. Now, I have to now return to this issue of the assassination of Daria Dugina, because I've been reading a lot of media speculations about two particular subjects, which is whether the Russians are in a position to bring an extradition request for this person who they say is the murderer. Some reports now place this person in Austria. And the second is that there's inevitably been Western speculations, or rather Western doubts about whether the Russian claims about this person having carried out this attack are true. Now, on the first point, the Russians can, in theory, apply for this person to be extradited from any EU country. I think the chances of the Russians obtaining the extradition of this person are precisely zero. So I want to make that absolutely clear. I don't think any Western country is going to hand her over to the Russians for purely political reasons. Now, on the second point about the various theories and skepticism about the Russian claims, I'm going to repeat again, this person has not been tried, has not been convicted. This person deserves the principle of the burden of proof. What I will say is that the Russians have provided a very great deal of information about this person, about what this person was doing in Moscow, and it's certainly a circumstantial case, but it's, to my mind, a strong one. A lot stronger than the case that was assembled over the Skripal affair, for example, by the British. Very few people, very few of those who express skepticism about this particular incident, about what the Russians claim about this particular murder, the Dugina murder, doubt in any way the British claims over the Skripal affair. This despite the fact that there are, as far as I'm concerned, very serious problems with the British account of the Skripal killing, which I'm not going to discuss in this programme, whereas the Russian claims about this particular individual and this individual's alleged role in the Dugina killing, well, this seems to be, on the face of it, a much more complete case. Now, I want to stress, saying it's a complete case doesn't mean it's proved. Only a court can do that, and I'm very sceptical this person will ever come before a court, though I would not discount that possibility entirely, but that's where we are at the moment with this. But anyway, there is a strong case, or so it seems to me. We haven't heard from this person. This person hasn't given us her account. Perhaps we never will. And as I said, I read all these attempts to knock holes in the Russian case, in the Western media. So far as I can tell, these attempts to knock holes have not been very convincing at all. That's all I'm going to say about that. Now, if these writers want to be skeptical about this case, which, as I said, it looks quite strong to me, perhaps they should re-examine some of their previous reporting about other cases, the Skripal case being just one. That's all I'm going to say. Anyway, moving forward, discussing other matters. It seems that there is going to be a meeting between Xi Jinping and Putin, both at the G20 summit in Jakarta and also at the prospective BRICS summit meeting in Samarkand, and that I am certain is coming. There's one very big piece of news which certainly does require a lot more discussion than I'm going to give in this video. I'm just going to allude to it briefly, and that is that there are now reports, and they seem to be reliable reports, that at the G20 meeting in Jakarta, Erdogan is going to have some kind of contacts with the Syrian government. There's even some suggestions that President Assad is going to meet Erdogan in Jakarta. I'm not sure that's true, by the way. I'm far from confident that President Assad at this moment is prepared to risk a journey all that distance away to Jakarta, to the G20 summit. But it does look as if the Turkish government has made a decision that is going to start communicating again with the Syrian government in Damascus. Now, if that is true, and it's so far more rumour than fact, but as I said, fairly reliable rumour, then that is the beginning of the end of the Syrian war. The Syrian rebels have relied heavily on Turkish support. Without it, it doesn't seem to me that they can sustain the conflict against the Syrian government to any great extent. If Turkey is talking to the Syrian government, then it is the beginning of the end of the Islamist insurgency in Syria against the Syrian government. It also, by the way, means that the Turkish government has decided not only is the Syrian government going to survive, that's been obvious for some time, but that Turkey needs its support to bring the Kurdish problem for Turkey in Syria under control, and that Turkey is about to take further action to try to push US troops out of Syria, something which is, from a Turkish point of view, essential if the Kurdish problem in Syria is to be resolved. So these could look like big moves. And given that the conflict between Syria and Turkey has been the biggest bone of contention between the Russians and the Turks, even though the Russians have been fairly successful in keeping their relations with the Turkish government on an even keel, despite the differences over this conflict. Well, that would signal an even bigger move on the part of Erdogan and the Turkish authorities towards the Eurasian states, towards integrating their countries with the BRICS. So this could be a big moment in Syrian affairs. It could be a major geopolitical move as well. Whether it happens is something we will have to wait and see. We will probably get information about it within the next few weeks, and then we will know where things are heading. Well, that's my update for today. There'll be more from me soon, discussing this conflict in Ukraine and no doubt in Syria in more detail. In the meantime, remember, you can find us on other platforms, on Locals first and foremost, on Rumble, on ODYSEE, and of course on Telegram. And remember, you can support us via Patreon and Subscribestar, and you can also go to our shop and support us by buying the great things that you will find there. And last but not least, thank you for joining me on this channel. But remember to tick the like button if you've liked this video, and also to check your subscription to this channel. That's me for the day. More from me soon.